Hey there, kids. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and Halloween is almost here. So, I've got the countdown ready to go. No worries about you kids at all. Everything is going to be planned out. Halloween is going to be the best this year that it has ever... Where are you going?
Trick-or-treating. Yeah.
Trick-or-treat? It's still 2 weeks to Halloween.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks to Halloween, but it's the first night of Cat Halloween.
Well, what? Cat Halloween?
Yeah. Oh my god, don't tell me you forgot. That is so insensitive. How do you think Hercules feels right now?
I didn't know Cat Halloween was a thing.
Typical. Now you're gonna start boycotting coffee chains serving tuna in their pumpkin spice lattes.
That doesn't sound very good at all, actually.
Did you even go to the pet store like I asked? It is the feast of 1,000 goldfish.
What the hell? No, okay, look, I'm sorry. I didn't know Cat Halloween was a thing. I mean, you know how busy it gets on the channel during October. But I promise, I will make time. Okay? I'll make time for Cat Halloween.
Okay, I guess it's okay you can miss a little bit.
Yeah, you go ahead and you take Herc and you guys get your first thing going, and I will catch up with you a little bit later.
Okay. Come on, Herc. I need to go trick-or-treating.
Oh, and I hope you have a cat Halloween.
That's racist.
Now that they're gone, hey there, boys and girls, finally getting back to the stories tonight, which means that I've got a very special bit coming from CoryxKenshin and ReignbotHorror featuring in tonight's story. And tonight's story isn't just some regular story that we usually do. No, see, this stuff comes from a book called Dark Places, Evil Faces, and it features New York Times best-selling authors. Not just that, but if you guys check the description down below, through every video in this countdown, you'll see that there's a link to be able to purchase the book, and all of the proceeds from it go towards the Macmillan Cancer Support. It's a charity out there in the UK that gives aid to people and families suffering from cancer. Enjoy tonight's stories, guys. We've got ones coming from New York Times' best-selling authors, some of the best authors that you can find on the internet, and Vincent Petacava.
His name was Cornelius. Well, Cornelius was the name that he went by, to anyone he could be bothered to tell. In truth, he had totally forgotten his real name and identity many years ago. He was a man of small stature and repugnant nature. His life had been a mess, just a long, blurred series of inconsequential moments that led to where he was now. Well, that was his belief. Cornelius was a man that was driven by primitive urges and gut instinct. He never planned. He didn't have a schedule. And he never knew where his next form of sustenance would come from. Sometimes, like today, things just happened. He had seen the woman earlier that afternoon as he had rode the bus. Not that he had a destination in mind. He had found her intriguing, attractive, yet also attainable. She sat reading a book in the seat opposite him, of which he couldn't make out the title, in a world of her own, totally oblivious to the world and her surroundings, except for the few times that she had glanced over towards Cornelius. Their gaze meeting for the briefest moment, she had stared at him for a long second, a quizzical look upon her face, before averting her attention back to her book. The woman was slim, with long, silky brown hair that hung down perfectly over her shoulders. It complemented her tanned olive skin and long, slim face, both of which were enhanced by thick, black-rimmed spectacles that sat perched upon her petite nose. Her features were completed by a set of thin, pale lips. Cornelius had sat staring at her for the full duration of his journey. Cornelius was usually the kind of person that blended into the background with little effort. Not that he minded. His anonymity was the perfect cover. Cornelius wasn't a vagrant, although he had no address, and he had a steady source of income. Although he wasn't considered attractive, he couldn't be called ugly. Everything about the man was plain. From his dowdy facial features and little frame to his drab taste in clothing. As he sat and marveled at this woman's allure, he had already made his decision. She would be his next. The woman looked up from her read and gazed out through the filthy bus window, suddenly realizing that she was nearing her destination. Pulling her leather bag from the floor, she placed it on her lap, dropping her book into it, and stood, hooking the strap over her right shoulder. Walking to the front of the bus, she steadied herself using the overhead handles. Cornelius continued to watch, amazed by her appeal, as her brown hair dropped perfectly like a silk scarf down the center of her long leather coat. She was tall and slender, her height enhanced by the 2-inch heels on her boots. Cornelius was sure she was perfect. She waited for a few moments until the driver indicated it and pulled in towards the curb. As she stepped from the vehicle, Cornelius grabbed his satchel and sloped his way quickly towards the exit, jumping from the bus a few short moments behind her, just enough for him to keep a safe distance to begin to follow. The perfect chameleon. Dusk was beginning to settle on the back streets of the old town, a part of the city that he barely recognized. The chilly evening breeze gently nipped at his cheeks. He turned up the collar of his woolen coat, attempting to keep the cold and unwanted eyes at bay. Endless rows of tall, seemingly deserted buildings stood back, towering over the footpath below. The once splendorous Georgian architecture now painted in a dingy and disheveled gray, tainted by traffic fumes and polluted city air. He continued to follow from a distance, intrigued as he clutched onto his satchel. What was a woman like her doing in this part of the city? He continued to follow as she rounded the next corner and crossed towards a decrepit-looking building that stood on the opposite side of the road. She stopped for a moment and gazed up at the structure. Cornelius continued to keep his vigil from a safe distance as she ascended the concrete steps and approached the tall wooden doorway. Putting her hand into her pocket, she produced a key. Looking around for a good few moments, she turned her attention back to the entrance, turned the key in the lock, and let herself in, immediately slamming the door behind her. Cornelius checked around. The whole street appeared to be deserted. Glancing over towards a street sign that hung from the side of a building opposite, he realized where he was. Beach Street. He began to cross the road towards the building where the woman had entered. The sole of his leather shoes clicked on the surface of the concrete as he walked. He stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked up at the building. It was an intimidating edifice. A 3-story townhouse with tall sash windows that hung vertically, taking up most of the space on the face of the structure. The roof of the building sloped backwards to a dark, tiled finish. Below the roof, centrally, sat one smaller window. Cornelius eased his approach and deliberated his intended plan. Despite the woman's magnetism, the whole experience had begun to leave him feeling unsettled. There was something about the situation that left him with an underlying feeling of dread. Gripping his satchel tightly, he slowly began to climb the steps towards the front door. He reached out, hesitating for the briefest moment before twisting the doorknob. To his amazement, the door had been left unlocked. Tentatively, he opened it inward and took a step inside. The air in the house was chilly, perhaps colder than outside. Cornelius stayed still for a moment, while his eyes adjusted to the darkness. He listened out for a sound of movement. He heard nothing but the tiniest sound of his own breathing. Gently, he placed the door shut behind him. Without the light from the street outside, the whole house was enveloped in darkness. He held his breath and he listened out. He reached inside the pocket of his jacket and removed the syringe containing anesthesia. A simple matter of locating her and pouncing from the shadows. He took a step forwards, trying to walk lightly as the heel of his shoe clicked on the bare floorboards beneath his feet. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he made out the silhouette of a staircase ahead of him. Slowly, he took a few steps forward. He stopped in his tracks when he heard faint whispering from the floor above, the voice of a woman. He listened intently, but he couldn't decipher any words. Who is she talking to? Cornelius moved forward, dancing on his feet across the bare wooden floorboards. He placed his foot on the bottom step and started to ascend the stairway. He froze upon his third step as a terrifying scream filled the night air, sending a chill down the nape of his neck. He quickened his pace, taking 2 steps at a time as he submerged himself deeper into the darkness. He looked around frantically as he reached the next landing, his heart thundering in his chest, threatening to smash through his ribcage. He searched around as best he could, while it's shrouded in complete black. He listened out. Nothing. Locating the next staircase, he began to climb again. As he reached the final landing, he spotted a doorway at the far end of the corridor, slightly ajar. Faint slithers of light spilled out through the gap. Cornelius smiled. He began tiptoeing down the corridor towards the source of light, his satchel held in his gloved left hand, the syringe firmly out in front of his right. A flicker of exhilaration spiked through his veins. As he approached the door at the end of the corridor, his form danced through the faint beams of light. He listened intently for the sounds of stirring as he noticed his breath hanging in the air. He heard nothing. He proceeded further, towards the door as goose flesh erupted up both of his arms, stood at the entrance. He gently placed his satchel down on the floor beside him and held his breath for one last moment before shoulder barging his way into the room. Cornelius halted as he entered. Disoriented and confused, the room was completely bare except for a single item of furniture. Each wall was bereft of any decoration and peeled back to original brickwork. A solitary light bulb hung from the ceiling, gently swaying from side to side, casting shadows across the walls. Placed directly in the center of the empty space was a single wooden chair atop a wooden floor blemished with dried, brown-colored stains. Cornelius frowned. He carefully gazed around the room, checking that he wasn't missing any details. It was empty. Panicking and confused, he began to turn on his heels to exit. He didn't have time to react as the woman slipped into the opening with feline speed and precision. Cornelius felt the thud on the side of his head as a heavy wooden object connected with the side of his skull. He fell backwards, landing on the floor in a twisted heap. His world began to spin. And within seconds, he was out cold. Cornelius began to awaken. He slowly pulled his eyelids apart, the corner of which had gathered with sticky gunk. He looked around, totally unaware of his surroundings. Then it came flooding back to him. The house. Cornelius struggled, but realized that he had been forced to sit. His hands were bound behind his back, his ankles tied together tightly with thick wires. His thick coat had been removed and his shoes removed from his feet. He called out,
Hello?
The soft voice of a woman came from behind him.
Oh, good. You're awake.
Cornelius snapped his head around to get a good look at his captor. She remained out of sight.
What do you want?
He asked.
I don't want anything.
Well, I think we both know that's not the case, otherwise I wouldn't be sat here strapped to a chair.
I suppose you have me there.
Cornelius felt a body brush his arm as his captor walked around him and into his line of sight. She tossed her own molded plastic chair onto the ground, the metal legs skidding across the wooden floorboards until it came to an abrupt stop a few feet away from him. Cornelius looked up at the woman, immediately recognizing her from the bus. She casually strode across the room and sat in the other chair, the backrest of the seat facing forward. She rested her arms across the top. She smiled.
Hi.
What the hell do you want?
Well, that's not very friendly, is it? I could ask you the exact same question.
What do you mean?
Well, unless I'm very much mistaken, you appear to have been following me since I got off the bus.
Cornelius smiled.
So how did you know?
Let's just say that I have a little experience in that area.
The woman stood from her seat and walked around Cornelius, back towards the door, her little hips swaggering as she sauntered. A few moments later, she returned, clutching his satchel. She sat back in her seat and faced him.
While you were out, I took the liberty of searching through your bag.
It's not a bag, it's a satchel.
Bag, satchel, you say tomato.
She reached in and pulled out the syringe that contained the clear liquid, held it toward the light bulb, and squirted a little bit from the tip. The chemical sprayed in an arc and speckled the wood floorboards.
What's this?
Cornelius didn't respond.
Look, we can either do this the easy way or the hard way. You really picked the wrong woman to follow home.
He offered no reply. The woman shrugged her shoulders before thrusting downward with the syringe, burying the needle deep into the flesh of his thigh. With the center of her hand hovering over the plunger for a split second, she slammed down with her palm. Cornelius gritted his teeth and grimaced. As he felt the liquid seep into the tissue inside of his leg, he refused to scream out. The woman quickly yanked the syringe as it protruded from his leg and tossed it carelessly over her shoulder. It plinked on the wooden surface and skidded behind her.
So,
she began.
I'm guessing the plan was to stick me with that thing. The one you were holding was to administer me unconscious? So the question is simple. What did I just inject you with, and how long will it take to kill you?
Cornelius didn't respond. He began feeling drowsy, and a tight sensation rose through his throat, 2 side effects of the drug that he had once read about. He struggled against the chemicals as he felt them networking their way through his veins. The woman who sat less than 3 feet away from him was now blurring in and out of focus. He sat rigid, attempting to fight the drug as it worked its way around his nervous system, and his head began gently flopping forward and backward as he attempted to keep it upright. The woman clicked her fingers in front of his face. Inside of his mind, the sound echoed like a baseball hitting a home run.
No. Stay with me. You're not going to pass out on me, are you? What is that stuff?
And despite his best attempts not to answer, Cornelius replied.
Sodium thiopental.
In English, please?
Truth serum.
He stammered. The woman raised an eyeball incredulously.
Really? I thought that stuff only existed in the movies. Besides, isn't sodium pentothal banned in Europe?
She gave a sly wink.
Not if you're resourceful.
So, who are you?
My name is Cornelius.
Cornelius, huh? So, tell me, Cornelius, why did you decide to follow me home this evening?
I was going to inject you with an anesthetic.
She looked over her shoulder to where the syringe she was holding earlier had landed on the floor.
Interesting. And then what?
Next, I would have bound your wrists and ankles together and sat you in a chair.
Well, isn't this just a really unfortunate situation you found yourself in? So, what next?
I would have injected you with the sodium thiopental.
Well, this is just uncanny.
She opened his bag and peered at the collection of tools inside. Pliers, a hammer, A scalpel, 3 blades, rusty barbed wire, a meat cleaver, and a blowtorch.
Well, I'm guessing from your bag of goodies here that you're some kind of handyman.
Well, you could say that. The plan was to talk to you for a while. The truth serum really works wonders for people who aren't really opening up about their real fears.
So you get people to tell you what they're afraid of. Why?
Because it really helps when torturing them.
The woman shook her head.
What are you, some kind of psychopath?
He shrugged his shoulders.
I don't really know what I am. You see, some normal people might think that an individual like me is a psychopath, a sociopath, wrong wiring, whatever their choice of phrase. To me, what I do is perfectly natural.
It's perfectly natural to take someone's life?
Not just their own. You see, when the truth serum starts to work, they answer all my questions. It's wonderful, almost poetic. They tell me all about themselves, their families, their friends. They give me their addresses, they give me their details of where their children go to school. Heck, they even give me the access code for the alarm on their parents' homes. I never tell them which of their family are next, if any. It doesn't make their dying moments any more pleasurable not knowing. Sometimes it's just a matter of circumstance, like today.
The woman raised an eyebrow.
Well, that's really quite impressive. You see, I've never met one of my kind before.
Cornelius frowned at the woman's statement.
Your kind?
Oh, yes. You see, I'm the same as you. I have the same animalistic urges. Over the years, I've lured many a tramp back to my den. They've found themselves in the exact same situation you find yourself in now.
I don't believe you.
It's not a matter of whether or not you believe me. As you can see, you're the one that's bound to a chair, and I'm the one with your bag.
It's a satchel.
The woman leaned in and sneered in his face. She reached into the bag and produced a scalpel. The woman held it up in the air, transfixed at the blade as the light reflected from the stainless steel tip.
There's something about blades, don't you think?
I like the scalpel, but I like to get creative with it, combining it with the pliers.
The woman reached into the bag and pulled out the tool. She snapped the jaws, nodded, and smiled in admiration at Cornelius.
I can see how that'd be fun. I don't think I've ever tried that one. It must be hard work to skin someone alive.
It's easier than you think once you find the right technique.
The woman ran the blade of the scalpel down the front of Cornelius's shirt. The razor-sharp blade threatened to cut through the fabric at any moment. She stopped at the first button and swiped gently with the blade. The button fell from the shirt effortlessly and plinked to the floor.
You see, I'm not quite sure what to do with you. Granted, you followed me home with the intention of doing horrible things to me. Yet I feel it would be a shame to waste a man of your unique talents.
She swiped the scalpel blade, and another button plinked to the floor.
If I were to untie you, would you be trustworthy?
The second I was free, I would smash you over the head and assault you.
Well, I do appreciate the honesty.
She winked and continued to slice the buttons of his shirt until it flapped open, revealing his puny, undefined chest and stomach. The woman tilted her head to the side, inspecting the man's frail torso.
Well, you're really not much to look at yourself. I don't suppose there'd be any chance of me having my own fun.
Cornelius tensed as she slowly ran the tip of the scalpel across the bare skin of his chest. He held his breath to restrict movement against the blade.
You seem tense, Cornelius. I'm assuming it must not be as fun when you're not in the driving seat.
The one pressed down firmly on the scalpel, and the blade punctured the outer layer of skin just above his navel. A slither of deep scarlet ran down from the entrance wound. Cornelius winced, but he didn't scream. The woman continued to run the blade down his skin, upwards towards his chest. Blood immediately streamed from the laceration. Cornelius refused to call out, despite the cold temperature. His face glistened with a hue of fresh perspiration.
So tell me, Cornelius, if that is your real name, how many people have you killed?
He shrugged, impassively.
Over the years, it's difficult to say. Dozens, scores, perhaps even hundreds.
Impressive. And you've never been caught?
No, it's just a matter of moving on, staying mobile. This lifestyle, albeit risky, can be quite gratifying.
You mean in terms of cash?
There's always something to be made, so what about you?
What about me?
You claim to be the same as me. How many people have you killed?
Nowhere near your league. I've always been intrigued by the darker side of humanity. My first was completely circumstantial. The result of two bums having a drunken fistfight in the street. One pulled a knife, the other guy bashed him over the head with a house brick and fled. There were no witnesses. The guy was lying in the street groaning and half-conscious. I picked up the knife and finished him off. Chances are he would have died there anyway.
So, you consider yourself humane?
I wouldn't exactly say that.
Where did you do it?
What do you mean?
Where did you cut him to finish it?
I ran the blade along his throat and watched him gag and bleed to death on the curb in front of me. I could pinpoint the exact moment when he took his last breath.
That's ruthless.
Says you.
And then what?
I was lucky enough to grow up a spoiled little rich girl, hence the ability to have this place as a second home. After bringing back a few more down and outs, I got bored. I wanted to up my game. It's so easy for a woman to meet a stranger in a bar or a nightclub and lure them back to her house. This room has seen all kinds of action.
Cornelius looked around admiringly, and despite the drugs still swimming around in his system, he had begun to regain control. He looked at the woman. Their eyes connected, a mutual respect was forming between the unlikely pair.
Have you ever considered taking on a partner?
A partner? You've already told me once what will happen if I let you up from that chair.
But over the time that we've been chatting, I've reconsidered my opinion of you. We would make one hell of a team.
I don't believe you.
How so? I have the truth serum pumping through my veins.
So, what are you suggesting? It's been years since I've...
You never lose that urge.
I'm not so sure.
So, what were you planning on doing with me?
The woman shrugged.
I haven't decided yet.
If you don't agree to this partnership right here, right now, I must kill you.
She smiled. She shook her head.
And how exactly do you plan on doing that? You're the one bound to the chair, remember? I don't think so. I'm going to have to deal with you another way.
Cornelius shook his head.
Shame. I was really beginning to like you.
The woman opened his bag and peered at the selection of tools inside.
So, Cornelius, do you have any preference on which item it is to be?
The straight razor.
She peered into the bag, pushing the items aside, looking for the blade. She looked at Cornelius and smiled sarcastically.
There isn't a straight razor in here.
I was referring to the one that I had concealed up my sleeve.
The woman didn't have a chance to react. As Cornelius leapt forward from the chair, she dropped the bag and struggled for air as his right hand gripped tightly around her throat and began crushing her windpipe. This year's 13-day Halloween countdown is in support of Dark Places, Evil Faces, a new collection brought to you by PS Publishing and features New York Times bestsellers, some of horror's most prolific authors, and Vincent Van Acaba. Sales of the book Dark Places, Evil Faces goes to the Macmillan Cancer Support. It's a charity based out of the UK that gives aid to people and families suffering from cancer. So, this Halloween, I hope you all enjoy the stories, and I hope we can do some good in the world. Sweet dreams.